like this. Okay, so our outline for today. We're just going to talk, as Frances said, balancing that agency mission, what you're trying to do with the community needs and donor priorities, because all of those might be different. Helpful tools for preparing proposals, and then resources for further reference. I've mentioned to both Suzanne and Frances, it is impossible to really leave today and go, I know everything there is to know about grant writing, right? So what I'm trying to do is I'm just going to give you a lot of information. If there's certain areas you want to know more about later, there'll be a short area for questions, but you can also ask me specifics. Okay, so that's little on here, but the way to start in your grant writing is to do your research. That is what I've learned is the way to be the most successful. You know, we talk in grant writing about your success rate, and all that is the average number of grants you wrote versus the average number that were actually funded. The national statistic for success rate is 8 out of 100. So that might help you manage your expectations a little bit, right? It doesn't mean that, oh, I didn't get that, I must have done something wrong. It just means that there are limited resources out there. There's a lot of people who need those resources, and so we're not going to be successful every time. But there are ways to improve your competitiveness, and the way to do that is to start by doing your research. Okay, so we talked about this. This is how I've always pictured it in my mind. So the agency mission, I think we all know what that is. That's why you exist. It's the uniqueness of what you're offering the community, those people that you serve and what you do. But then there's community needs, and the community needs are always much bigger than what any one agency can handle or can meet. And then there's the donor priorities. And those might also be different than the agency mission or the community needs. And so what you're looking for is what I call the sweet spot, where all those things sort of meet. And so if you've done your research, you can usually find a donor priority that is interested in what your mission is and the need you're trying to address. And so if you start there, you're already improving your competitiveness, so that you're not just sort of sending out a bunch of random applications. Okay, community needs. I think that for most of the agencies, especially the nonprofit agencies, you exist to try to meet a community need. So you're looking at what is that problem that's in need of creative solutions. And that's why you exist, or that's what you're trying to solve. And how we find that is by reviewing statistics. These are often called secondary source research. You can just go online. Our website for Potomac Health Foundation has links to health-related resources and statistics, but you look for those kinds of statistics that say, 1 out of every 5 people have this, or 20% of the population is that. Like, for instance, for us, it's 17% of Prince William County is uninsured. Those kinds of statistics are what we're looking for. And that should be available online. And then you can also, another way to find out about community needs is to conduct an assessment. That's just independent research that you did on your own. It could be a survey, it could be a rapid assessment, those kinds of tools. And another way to figure out community needs is that you're doing the work. You have firsthand experience. There are lots of needs that aren't ever captured in statistics. And so you are the experts in what those needs might be, and don't be afraid to include that firsthand experience in your grant writing, because I know now as a donor that also shows that you are integrated in the community and you're aware of what's happening. Okay, so the agency mission. How does the grant opportunity fit with your agency's mission, values, goals, or strategy? So you prioritize the difference that you want to make in the world. That should come first, before the dollars. The dollars should really be what supports your mission, not dictates it. If it goes the other way around, I'll tell you that everybody ends up frustrated. You end up frustrated because then you're taking away from your mission, your mission drift, and the donor may not be getting exactly what they were wanting either because your main mission is something else. There's a little quote from a great philosopher, Dr. Seuss. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. And so the whole purpose of that is to just say, you're offering something unique. And so don't compromise that for the sake of funding. Look for the funding that helps you accomplish that goal. Donor priorities. So what is it that the donor's hoping to achieve through their grant program? You know, donors have, the best term I could come up with is personalities. There's certain things that donors have that they like and certain things that they don't like. They call the things they like priorities. They call the things they don't like excluded purposes. So you're looking for what is their personality, and is their personality a match with the agency that we work for? Okay, so the way to learn about a donor's personality is you start by reading their guidelines. Read these closely. Donors don't put that out there just because they want to waste your time or their time. They're actually telling you what they're looking for. So read those guidelines, and then before you submit your draft, compare what you're submitting to those guidelines. Because in the end, it will help you be more competitive within the grant cycle. Look at their prior grant awards, both at the type of grants that they gave and the amount. If the average grant that they give out is $25,000 and you're asking for $150,000, your likelihood to be successful is not very likely. But at the same rate, there might be grantees that are more akin to giving like $500,000 or $1 million or $250,000, and you're looking for $10,000. It's probably not a good fit because they're doing big dollar grants. So look at the type of grants, look at the amounts, and I'll give you some resources. If you don't know how to find that, I'll give you resources later on how to find that information. And then if they're offering informational sessions, attend those sessions. Participate. It's another way that foundations are sort of letting you know what it is that they're looking for. Okay. Donors like projects that clearly communicate what will be accomplished and how it will be achieved. They like projects that document success or lessons learned. They like projects that produce results. Here's a word that if you've ever done a grant should be familiar to you. Outcomes, outcomes, outcomes. They ask for that all the time, and all that is really just what's going to happen if we give you this money? What difference are we going to see? What will the result be? They like projects that don't create dependence. That's often in the grant as sustainability. You know, what's going to happen if you don't get the grant in the future? Do you have another way to fund this project? Are the people that you're helping, are you creating dependence, or are you actually creating a system where they can ultimately be independent? We know need doesn't go away, but from a donor perspective, just so that you know, I mean, the amount of dollars, no matter how much it is still a limited commodity. And so if we make a commitment to one organization, it means we have to say no to another. And so we want to maybe invest in an organization for an amount of time. For some grant-making organizations, it's 12 months. For some, it's a number of years. But that money, then, we're saying no to other people. And so sometimes they want to have the flexibility to then shift money to other projects, which also need an investment of income. And so that sustainability thing is...
That seems to be the biggest stumbling block.
The sustainability?
I mean, it's nice that donors want to provide money so you can start doing something or do more of something. But how realistic is that now that you've done something that, from a donor's perspective, is that I mean, I understand why they want to do it, but catch-22 problem.
Here's what, the only thing I can think of as an example, and Francis, if you don't mind, I'll use your organization as an example. Francis helps people who are chronically hungry or homeless or dealing with difficult circumstances like domestic violence. Do we think that we're going to eradicate that from the world anytime soon? It'd be nice, but I don't think that that's realistic. So, when she's looking for grants, as an example, the methods that she's using to meet the needs of that population might change over time. If she was doing the exact same thing that she was doing 20 years ago, it may not be as successful, and maybe she's still delivering food provisions, but the way she's delivering it or how she's reaching that population should change over the course of time because things in society change, circumstances change, and so as long as you're adjusting with the changing circumstances, I think you can find ways to still find donors, but it is, if you're like to submit the same idea, the same method to reach the same population, it becomes, I don't have another word to say, but like sort of like stale or unattractive then to the donor. So if you can find ways to keep it fresh or to convey the freshness of what you're doing or how you're trying to meet the need, it is more appealing. And so you could have a long-term relationship with the donor agency as long as they feel like you're evolving, I guess. Because I've worked with, for instance, I've worked with a private foundation in my old work who invested in us for over 10 years, and I wasn't there the whole time. But what they said to us that why they kept investing in us is because we were always coming back to them with either new ways to do things or new ideas or new things to do. And so we had a long-term relationship with them, but they didn't always fund the same thing. Is that? But it is a challenge because it means you're always on the hunt for money. Okay, donor priorities. It's in your best interest to make it easy on the donor by using simple writing and defining technical terms. So now I've been 100% devoted for this year to grant making, and they got a lot to read. And so if you can use simple writing so that they can understand the concepts quickly and easily, that helps you be competitive. If there's technical terms, and I've been guilty of it, I would always have somebody review my drafts because sometimes things are so normal to me that I forget that it's not normal to the rest of the world when you're working in a specific sector. So I would have somebody outside that sector review my draft, and if they ever had a pause or sort of went, I don't understand that, that meant I needed to make some changes before I submitted because it was probably too technical, too ingrained in what I was doing. So that's just a little tip. Also, to put key concepts into graphs or tables or charts, especially if you're talking about trends or dollars or statistics, it makes it a lot more readable. I mean, if you think for yourself, when you're reading a newspaper or some kind of article, even in a magazine, they do this because, and that's what your eye is drawn to. It's the same kind of concept when you're writing a grant. Anticipate problems and possible solutions. And we'll talk in a minute about how to do that effectively in your grant writing. And then doing the prep work is the last one in that section.
That problems and solutions sounds like a risk management plan. Is that really?
It is. It's a risk mitigation plan. Yeah. It's a risk mitigation plan, and we're going to go through one of those. So I mentioned earlier that I think grant writing is a functional art form. I think it's like a craft. You have to really work at it. And the reason I say that is because what typically happens in organizations, I've been on the other end, is that it's something that there's someone in the office that seems to have free time, and then you just assign it to them, and they have to fit it in with everything else they have to do with their life, right? That's hard to do because this really does take a lot of mental energy, a lot of time to do a good grant proposal. And so I know not everybody has the resources to have somebody dedicated to grant writing, but maybe at least consider that in certain peaks and valleys within your organization, when there's busy grant application times, because it does go in cycles, that maybe that person who has to do that has a little bit of a relief from some of their other responsibilities, because it really, to do it well, takes a lot of effort. Okay, so where does one start? This is where we start to give you some tools. All project design should originate from the desire to make the world a better place, to enact change and solve a problem. So we start with the problem that we want to solve. We talked a little bit about this before. How do we identify the problem? We can have our firsthand experience, just time spent in the community, formative or rapid assessment tools, secondary sources like internet searches, or partner agencies. There's no reason why if somebody already did an obesity survey that we need to do a second obesity survey, or if somebody already did some assessment out there that we can't borrow that information or work with them because maybe we have one little addition in there that's related to economic factors, and maybe when they're doing the survey we can include that in their demographic section and not have to do a whole separate survey. Okay, so we all know this, but every community is going to have more than one problem. This, again, isn't ideal world, but so we're going to identify more than one problem, so how do we then prioritize the problem? This is a tool that I used to use with teams. I used to be a director of project managers. And so we would have problem A, B, C, and D, right? Those could be anything. You can think in your mind probably right now of at least 4 problems in the community you're trying to address. So we have A, B, C, and D. And then you look at the magnitude of that problem. What is the frequency or the coverage? So it might cover a big geographic area, or it might occur often, and the severity. I mean, is it life or death? Is it those kinds of things? And you look at it and you give it a score. Now, generally what I would do is if there's 4 problems, you score it 0 to 3. So something gets a 0 and then everything else. If there's 9, you score 0 to 8. Whatever, you just start at 0 when you're scoring. And then the feasibility. So what is the likelihood or our capacity to then meet this problem? Do we have is it a high financial investment that's going to take, and then do we have those resources? What about time investment? And do we have that kind of a resource to be able to address it? And you add up across the board what that score then is. Now the rank is a little bit different because after you have the score, you can make a subjective opinion about what your rank of that problem will be. So this is just an example that I've decided that problem A doesn't occur as frequently as, say, problem B. But problem A has more severity than problem D, but the highest severity is problem C. So that's really closer to life and death than problem D is. The financial investment, problem B is going to be the most expensive for us to address. And time investment, problem C is going to take the most time investment from us. So we go in the score, and problem B comes out with the top score. But the rank is that there was a determination made that problem C is actually the problem we're going to address. It's the one, it may take a bigger time investment, but it's the one that we're most uniquely qualified to make a difference in, and so that's what we're going to address. Okay? So we've ID'd the problem, then what? You put what you've learned and some key project concepts into an easy-to-read format. I suggest the logical framework table. I gave each of you a log frame sample. This is something that I actually use when writing a grant. If you guys don't have one, I have some extra copies up here. can pass those that way. So I'm going to let you just take that back with you and look at it and whatever, but it's a simple table where you have your objectives. It has both long-term, intermediate, short-term results. It has your major activities. It has your monitoring and evaluation plan, about how you'll be tracking these objectives, your indicators, and then what source of information you use, and then any assumptions or risks. So you can use this as a tool when writing. One of the reasons why I like the log frame as a writing tool, and it's why I start there anytime I'm writing a grant, is because it can be easily shared with others. Like personally, I've never worked in an environment where I get to write the grant and then implement the project and never have to involve another person. There's usually somebody who has to approve. Maybe there's someone who's technical that you want their input. And then maybe the person who's writing the grant isn't the person who's going to implement the grant. And so you need to be able to pass off what you were thinking to someone who will be implementing it. And so I found the log frame to be the simplest tool to accomplish all of those things. And it's a lot easier once I get a finalized log frame to just go in and fill in the blanks in an application, a grant application, without having to change my application a bunch of times based on other people's input. What that does is it sort of sets me up to have inconsistencies and errors in my grant application if I'm changing the written application many times. So I use this instead. And when everybody's okay with that, then we go to writing. The other thing is that there might be a project you're submitting to multiple funders and donors, and it helps keep everything working together on the same path. So I might take this portion and ask some donor to fund that, and another portion and ask another donor to fund that. I'm going to use an example of a grant that I had written. We'll get to it, but it was a nutrition project. And so it was in Cambodia. I know not everybody's going to work in Cambodia, but there are some elements that are transferable. And in Cambodia, there were communities of people who were very impoverished, who basically were taken advantage of, where they were moved off their land and they were resettled. They were never resettled. They were put in displaced people camps, which is like a refugee camp but in your own country. And so these resettlement communities were popping up everywhere and around one of the cities where we worked. And so there were multiple needs, and we decided we would address malnutrition and nutritional needs. Well, we submitted to World Food Program to provide the food, because that's what they do. And we submitted to UNICEF to help us with some infrastructure and also some of the treatment. And we submitted to another donor to just give us some money for overhead costs, right? But it was all the same project working toward the same goal, working off the same log frame. I just took what was relevant to that particular donor and pitched that. So that's one of the reasons I like the log frame. Okay. So just some history about the log frame. It was invented in 1979 by consultants for USAID for program design and evaluation. It was then introduced in 34 countries, and really now it's the professional standard for project management. Now, what it looks like, the format changes, but the basic concept is the same. Okay, so what is the basic logic model? You have your resources and your inputs. These are all the things like the human resources, the office space, the dollars, the equipment that goes into doing your project. And then those lead to the activities, the things you're busy doing, which then leads to the outputs. One of the other things I want to mention is one of the handouts is a glossary of terms. I'll mention it now. There are certain words in grant writing, project management that's common in the English language, but it means something specific in grant writing. It's like a technical term. And so I'm giving you the glossary of terms, the best definitions that we could come up with for these things so that you would know what it means when they're asking you on a grant application. So when they're saying outputs, they're not just talking about what happened, because what typically people will report on as an output is your completed activities. It's not what they're asking for. They're asking for what was the result of those completed activities. So as an example, I'm holding a training. I could say there were, I don't know how many people are in here today, but say there were 40 people in the training. So we had one training with 40 people in attendance. That's a completed activity. That's not a result. What happened as a result of that training? So there's a lot of different things you could say. One is increased knowledge. I could give all of you an evaluation and say, what did you learn? Did you walk away with something about grant writing that you didn't know before? Well, then that's the result, increased knowledge. Or maybe I want it to be something about behavior. Did any of you change something you were doing as a result of the training? That's a result. The training itself, happening, just a completed activity. So an output isn't just something happened, it's what the result of that activity is. Outcome is what you want to happen by the end of your project. And then a goal is some long-term thing that your project is contributing to. So it could be a national level objective, it could be a statewide or county level objective, but your project is helping contribute to that. One example I gave at a June event we held was the National Get Fit program. So maybe you're doing a local obesity reduction project, but you could say it's helping to contribute to that national level Get Fit program. So that's the idea, and it's long past the end of the grant cycle or your project. That particular program might exist. So these are your planned work, and these are your intended results. Okay, short-term outcomes lead to intermediate outcomes, which lead to long-term outcomes. That's the result chain. And we just call those outputs, purpose or outcome, and impact or goal. Ways to also help to differentiate these is that these outputs happen closer in time or easier to measure and more attributable directly to your program. As you move across the continuum, these are more distant in time, harder to measure, and less attributable to your program. Okay, so that's the log frame. Moving on. Okay, when you're in the log frame, one of the areas is indicators. How are you, an indicator is just simply, how are you going to be measuring or tracking the results of your program, right? So selecting indicators is something people spend a lot of time on. And just so you guys know, there's resources out there for selecting indicators. You could ask an expert, somebody who does this already. They probably know what the typical indicators are. You can search for professionally accepted standards. There's a lot of them out there. A Google search will produce some of that information for you. There really, at least in my experience, is not much need to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to necessarily come up with your own indicator, because usually someone has done this work somewhere. And with a little research, an acceptable indicator can usually be found. And usually if somebody's done the work, it means it's also collectible information, because sometimes we come up with an indicator and there's no way to actually collect that data. And that's not good. But the log frame, you'll realize that, because then it's your means of verification, your source of information, you go, oh, I can't get that information, and so maybe you would change your indicator before you're at the end of your grant cycle and then go, oh, I don't know how to get that information. How can I report it? So, all right, so we talked, someone asked before, risk mitigation. Especially if you're applying for a larger grant. Say some of the private foundations that have a bent toward research. Or if you're applying for federal or sometimes state dollars, they'll ask you for a risk mitigation strategy. The log frame does ask you to put in your assumptions and your risks. This is a tool that I would use, and I have used often, and in fact I would put the table as an appendix, into the grant application and say, here's my little table, and then anything that I felt needed to be mitigated, I would write what the plan was, the contingency plan, and that was my appendix, and that's what would go into the application. So what you're looking for, if you can't see it, is the probabilities at the top. So it's the likelihood that this thing will happen. And then on the other side is impact. So what is the impact this is going to have on my project? Well, if you have something that is very likely to happen and the impact is high, like you may not be able to do your project, you better have a contingency plan. That's the mitigation part, right? So the project I mentioned to you earlier about the resettlement communities, these are people who are impoverished and obviously have no rights, they just lost their home. What's the likelihood they're going to be moved again? Pretty likely. What impact is that going to have on our project? It's pretty big. So we need a contingency plan for when that happens, and we had one. There were 44 communities surrounding the city we were working in. We did an assessment in 10, we chose 3. Our plan was that if they get moved to an area where we cannot continue the project as we designed it, we just move down the list to number 4, right? And then it happened. They moved one of our communities, and we went and did an assessment and found that we couldn't continue the project, so we moved to number 4. Now my boss was freaking out. What do we do? They're not there. I said, we have a plan. And that was our plan, and we just worked the plan. Okay. I also recommend that you come up with a contingency plan for those things that have a high impact and a medium likelihood. Just for your own peace of mind, and it also helps, especially in those larger grants. They think, oh, these people know what they're doing. They're going to be able to implement successfully. It helps to increase your competitiveness. And then, like I said, I would literally just write a little header underneath this box. And what I would write in the box would be, you know, our communities are resettled, or our access to food is denied. And so then I would write that, and then underneath I would write what our mitigation plan was, and it would just be a bullet point and say, if access to food is denied, we will do this. We'll purchase it with our own money, or if the community is resettled, we'll go to the next one on the list that we assessed. So that's how I would submit it as an appendix to a large grant. So we're taking then this information from the log frame and putting it right into a proposal. So I pulled this right off a funded proposal. This was the proposal submitted to UNICEF. But in the narrative portion, where it's asking you the description of your problem and what you're going to be doing about it, these came right off my log frame. The organization I worked for at the time was Samaritan's Purse. They'll train and work with health center staff to assess children for malnutrition during bi-weekly home visits, and will refer children with acute malnutrition to the Nutrition Rehabilitation Program. That's what we called our project. Or the healthcare facilities with therapeutic programs running according to national recommendations. Other activities will include community mobilization, infant and young child feeding, promotion sessions at the community level, home visits to houses with children who are malnourished, hygiene lessons, and cooking demonstrations that target caregivers. Those were my major activities. I just put it in narrative form. In my log frame it was bullet, now it's narrative. It's a pretty easy transition. Project goal. This is beyond the scope of our project. To support the Ministry of Health to deliver essential nutrition services at the health facility and community level in 3 urban resettled communities around Phnom Penh, Cambodia. Objective, provide treatment. So this is what our project was hoping to do, provide treatment for 121 children ages 6 to 59 months with acute malnutrition in those 3 urban communities surrounding Phnom Penh by the end of 2010. And then key activities. We were providing financial support, doing assessments for malnutrition, and then providing immunizations and vitamin A supplements. And then the monitoring system, this is something that's often asked. It's literally off the middle portion of the log frame. We'll have a pre and post test for nutrition and hygiene education sessions and monitor knowledge increase. We'll do biweekly home visits to monitor weight gain, edema, their MUAC scores, which is mid-upper arm circumference screening, and their appetite. We'll also monitor the hospital referral system. We'll do vendor tracking for our voucher redemption and food purchases, and we'll have a midterm and final evaluation conducted by an outside evaluator. Okay, resources. If you want to see other formats for logic models, other than the one I gave you, you can go to these resources. Innovation Network and Kellogg Foundation. And there's the links. And I think Suzanne has this presentation, so if you guys want it, I see people writing furiously. you can ask her for the
We have
presentation.
sign-in sheets here, so you can give them the names.
Okay. Writing resources. So say you're new to writing or you want to improve your writing. I recommend, these are tools I've used. There's probably more than that. These are just tools I've actually used. Foundation Center. And Foundation Center does have an office in the DC area, so we're not far. They hold workshops on all kinds of things that you could attend. And then also your local library. There's books, there's resources at the library. The library is a good place to start. Some libraries have a whole nonprofit center if you haven't already used it. So if you're trying to track available funds, you just want to know what's out there that's available that we could pursue. In the past, I've signed up for the Philanthropy News Digest, which is a service provided by Foundation Center, and they send out, and you get to pick how often you want it, but they send out updates about who's funding and what funding is available and all of that. And then there's grants.gov if you want to look for government grants, and I do think they include state level grants too. Grants.gov does have a few people that will, like a few agencies they work with that will, because it's hard to go into grants.gov and find what you're looking for usually, that will pare that down and send you updates if there's specific things you're interested in. Like I want to do community-based X, or I'm interested in art and environment, or I'm interested in whatever. There's different people that will then send you something to your email inbox about those. You don't have to go searching for those things. There are some also paid opportunities to access this information. Every agency might have different amount of resources to pay these. Grants Professional Association. The annual fee to be a member is like $175. When you pay that fee, you have automatic resource or access to GrantStation. The GrantStation membership is over $200, so you're getting a big bang for your buck in that. The other way, if you want to access GrantStation, is really GrantStation is a great clearinghouse for available funds or grants that are out there. You can pay by month to that. You don't have to pay the annual. And then GuideStar is a way to look up foundations and find out who they funded, how much money they intend to give, all of that information. So a lot of that information should also be on the agency's website. Most granting organizations will tell you about past awards as well as post their financials, which will give you information about them and how much money they have available. Okay. I know that was a lot of information. Yes?
Hi, the Economic Research Institute's a good free source of 990s and other information useful for grants too. I didn't
Okay.
see it up there, but it's my favorite because
Okay.
it's free.
Free. So instead of using GuideStar, the what is it?
Economic Research Institute.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew there's lots of things out there. These are just ones I've used.
I was just wondering if it's common if you apply for a grant for a certain amount of money. Let's say you did your research and found out, okay, this company only does $50,000 to $75,000 grants, and you say, okay, well, I'm going to go for $75,000. Is it fair to say that they may say, well, we don't feel you're worth 75, but we'll offer you 50? Is this a commonplace, or do they say, oh, you know what, we're not going to give 75, and they don't even think back to, well, maybe we'll give them 50?
Again, it goes back to the personalities of the different grant makers. But the majority of grant makers, well, in case you don't know, most grant makers are under IRS requirement to give a certain amount of money anyway. So they have to give that amount of money. And most of them do want that money to go to good causes. So they might reduce the request so that they could give to more agencies. It really depends on that particular cycle and then that grant maker's bent. It depends. I mean, but I've received, usually if they like your project, they'll give you something, even if it's a significantly less portion of what you asked for. They'll try to give you something. So you may not always get what you asked for, but it's a good way to build a relationship with them to even take that amount and then do well and go back later and ask for more. Yes?
Build a relationship, and that's what I wanted to ask about. I know there's kind of before, during, and after relationships with foundations. Could you give some ideas and suggestions, especially if we're approaching a new foundation? Would you suggest some kind of protocol? Should we call? Should we? What are good practices?
Yeah. So because we had to recently develop our website, I've looked at a lot of foundation websites recently. They often tell you how they want you to contact them. Contact us by email. Contact us by phone at this number. So look at their website because they often tell you how they want you to contact them. But the other thing I would tell you, and I think this is something that comes over time as you've had more experience as a grant maker, don't be afraid to ask questions. The worst that would happen is that they just don't answer your question, which already you don't have the information. So, it really is something I would encourage you to do, because if you ever don't know, just ask. And they tell you how to contact them. So ask those questions, because early on I was sort of hesitant. Do I contact them? They'll let you know if you've crossed the line. But feel free to ask questions. And they'll tell you, I mean, I've had grant makers say, well, we can't answer that. But, I can give you the information I've given to everybody else. Yeah.
I'm working with a couple of groups that were getting by on earmarks, and the earmarks are gone now. Do you find competition for grants going up as the earmarks go?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys aren't already feeling it, especially the nonprofits in this room, the economy has gone like that over the last couple of years. And so just in general, the dollars available are limited. The federal dollars have been cut back significantly, in some areas almost just completely gone. And so that means that those people are out seeking money from other places and other sources. And then just because people in general seem to have less dollars in their pocket, there seems to be less money out there. But what I would recommend then to be competitive in that world is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Because from a donor's perspective, if they're giving one grant and it's helping 3 or 4 agencies, they feel like their dollars are going farther. So try to find partners to go in together, and then maybe you're each offering something unique and meeting a broader array of needs, which also then makes you more competitive. But yeah.
In your experience, do you have any websites like for job-specific things like construction workers, for instance, that are all out of work? We've been writing grant after grant looking for money for our HCCA Academy. We do a lot of training, but we never get one. So is there a specific place to look? I personally use Google, and I go and come up with as many terms
as I can come up with. But sometimes when I'm really looking for a specific thing, I'll sit down and I'll write all the different terms that I think might go with that. Job skills training, construction, education, whatever. And then I type all those in whatever different kinds of configurations I can come up with, this plus that or whatever. And you can go into GrantStation and do the same thing, and that's the best way I know of to sort of pull out what might be there. Yeah.
I would recommend Foundation Center.
Yeah.
Their list, I think it's 100,000 foundations. It's not free, but if you go to their K Street office, it's 1615 K Street, right by the Metro. When you're in the Foundation Center in DC, you can use that resource for free, and they'll teach you, and you can narrow down. You can say, I think you can say Northern Virginia, or you might even be able to say Prince William County. If you're in Prince William County, job training, construction, you could really narrow it down, and it'll pull a list of X amount of foundations that really care about giving to, job training for construction workers in Prince William County or metro area or wherever.
And libraries sometimes have those resources too, so ask your library if they have that search engine.
Not sharing.